Hello, and thank you everyone for being here. And special thanks to Anna, Kate, and Helen for joining the discussion, and to Becca and the Manchester University Press for organizing this event. So I'm going to briefly talk about the book and the main points that I have raised in the book. In Global Marxism, I examine the lives, ideas, and legacies of a selection of revolutionaries from the Global South. And I highlight how they embraced Marxism and adapted it to local contexts. My aim has been to demonstrate that Marxism is an evolving force with immense transformative potential. In selecting these figures, I prioritized geographical diversity across the Global South, so Latin America, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, East Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East, to illustrate Marxism's appeal across various regions of the Global South. Each figure that is discussed played a significant role in the revolutionary politics of at least one country and contributed meaningfully to Marxist theory. Due to the patriarchal revolutionary culture, there was no women that rose to the equivalent leadership level to the figures in the book. And that's why all the figures are men. But this does not mean that women played no role in the production, circulation, and practice of the ideas discussed in the book. I have made a conscious attempt to highlight the role of women wherever they emerge in the course of their stories. Some important female historical figures I came across in the course of my research certainly warrant great attention in future. In contrast to their male revolutionary counterparts, these women never became particularly visible in the transformation of the societies within which they lived and worked. Therefore, it is a much more challenging task to assemble a meaningful and representative sample. The task is especially difficult given that many women had to disguise their identities to be heard or remain safe within the dominant patriarchal revolutionary culture. So in the next few minutes that I have, I briefly summarize the key points. First, unlike what some critics have argued, Marxism is not Eurocentric. In the book, I have shown how Marx himself was not Eurocentric. But more than that, I have demonstrated how a Marxist tradition was born from engagement with Marx's ideas across the Global South. Marxism's analysis of how economic structures shape societies makes it particularly relevant for understanding colonial exploitation and imperialist expansion, which focuses on resource extraction and access to cheap labor. This analysis also applies to the ongoing economic and political control that former colonial powers and the United States exert over the Global South, and economically and politically benefit from this control. That is why in the Global South, revolutionary movements and leaders have extensively drawn on Marxism in their struggles to overthrow colonial and new colonial regimes, but also to build fair and just societies after their victories. In this process, these revolutionary leaders and thinkers have adapted and indigenized Marxist thought and contributed to revolutionary theory. This shows Marxism is very dynamic and has so much potential to be fitted in the specific context of struggle. Second, global Marxism urges us to return the word decolonization to its actual material meaning. There is a difference between decolonization as an intellectual movement that seeks to challenge the dominance of Western perspectives and tries to include more diverse non-Western voices and the actual process of decolonization. The actual process of decolonization is about freedom from colonial and imperial rule. It's about control over your own land, your own resources, your industries. It's about dismantling the economic structures that benefit the colonizers and allow for that kind of an exploitation. And it's about replacing those structures with something different. This is why I argue for reconnecting basically decolonial debates with Marxism, which provides a framework for such material analysis and transformations. Each of the figures emphasized the importance of economic relations in underpinning structures of dominance, inequality, and exploitation. Their work shows that despite local adaptations, Marxism has remained a coherent set of ideas as it has developed historically and spread geographically. While creatively engaging with Marxism, all of the figures stayed true to its core principles: class struggle, historical materialism, anti-capitalism, and envisioning a kind of socialist or communist society beyond capitalism. Each figure was deeply engaged in practical politics, practicing a revolutionary politics. They were also organic intellectuals. They joined, engaged, and lived with the subjugated and subaltern classes and operated within that unique space where the privileges of the rather powerful meet with the disadvantages of the powerless and the oppressed. So these revolutionaries left their comfort zones to go beyond abstract theorizing and armchair philosophizing. Finally, internationalism was a cornerstone of revolutionary politics for many of the figures. They all insisted that their particular situation needed to be seen in the larger context of capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism. For example, Ho Chi Minh became a prominent member of the international communist movement and actively participated in the Comintern. Shortly after his arrival in Paris, he joined the French Socialist Party and later became one of the founders of the French Communist Party. Moreover, he cooperated with Chinese revolutionaries in mobilizing Chinese peasants. Amilcar Cabral not only freed Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde from Portuguese colonialism, but also became one of the founding members of the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola. Argentine Che Guevara became one of the revolutionary leaders in Cuba and later joined the struggles in Congo and Bolivia. He constantly insisted that the Cuban Revolution should remain in solidarity with all oppressed people of the world and assist their struggles. And I like to close by emphasizing this point. The nature of most problems we are facing today, from the climate crisis to global inequalities, to the rise of right-wing nationalist movements, and the violence in Palestine, is global. And therefore, the solutions to these problems will be global. Over the past year or so, we have seen a new wave of internationalism emerging with Palestine, the most powerful that we have seen in the 21st century. I hope that greater engagement with global Marxism and its premises will not only help us better analyze the complexities of our world, but also inspire more people to contribute to these international networks of millions, fostering solidarity among one another and with the oppressed, a vital step in the fight for a fairer and more just world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simin. That was really interesting. I'm now going to hand over to Anna Cecilia, who's going to speak for us. So over to you.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I just want to say that I'm really happy to be here. This is a real opportunity, not only because we're all women, but also to discuss such a good book and talk about Marx and revolution and contributions from the global south. So the first thing I would say is I really enjoy this book, but also that the book should be really welcome after what happened the other day, yesterday, I think in the United States. We can see, I want to contextualize this book. We can see that this book reminds us of the potential of the inspiration that comes from the global south in this particular, in different moments and these particular ways of understanding revolution, I might say, but nevertheless, how much is happening, particularly today when we can see that the democratic systems are failing and they don't really portray the real wish of people to change things. And the topic is not the far right, but I just want to say that we had to take it into consideration because we really need a new global left. When I say we, I think everybody, it will be beneficial to everybody because we don't have any space now to enunciate other realities than the ones that are imposed to us. And the interesting thing today is that people are not having horizons, dreams to make them better. We are all very concerned with what's going to happen today or tomorrow. And things change and we don't have that kind of utopia. I'm not saying we should bring it back in this way. I will say about this in a minute. But this is a new, no Eurocentric legacy that Simin brought in this book. Nehru, Ho Chi Minh, Mao, Cabral, Fanon, Che Guevara, and Marcos as well, that I had something to say about it, but not yet. Yeah, they are essential for us to read and to understand. There are others who didn't lead revolutions, but they were inspirational. And I think the issue about the global far right, vis-a-vis whatever we can do as a global left, is the issue of hope, which is my topic. Hope as a category of struggle, and myth as well, in a good sense. For example, Mariátegui, the Peruvian Marxist, said at the beginning of the 20th century, when Bloch was talking about hope, he was talking about the importance of myth and hope for the left, because he said neither reason nor science can satisfy all needs for infinity that exist in man. Reason itself has taken it upon itself to demonstrate to men that it is not enough. And why I'm reading this? Because in a conversation that I have with Dinerstein that was published, will be published in Rethinking Marxism, is a dialogue. He talks about the importance of myth for Nazism. So if we want to understand the far right from the perspective of rationalism, we will fail. What they have created, and Hitler this too, is an engagement with other temporalities, with the past, for example, peasants, middle classes that believe in something else, and not the rationality. Obviously, when we think of the far right today, it's obvious that it's a disaster, but for us. But how are people engaging with them? I think this is very important. So this just says Hitler here ignited or at least found through non-bourgeois movement in bourgeois youth as he shaped a certain ascetic energy, create a strongly religious army, a troop with a myth, the myth of Germany, the myth of making the United States great again. And I think this is what's lacking. And I think the inspiration from this book is essential to restart thinking why Marxism or the Marxist left has lost the will to dream, to venture beyond. And at the moment, the only thing we hear is a description and a criticism of the system, which is great because we need this cold stream of Marxism, as Bloch calls it. But we need the warm as well, the myth, in a good way, the ideas, what do we want to do with our lives? So Bloch says, let's not abandon the terrain of hope to the enemy, because they know what they had to do with it, and we don't. Now, my second point, I think, about this book and my work and for the panel is to think how interesting is that at the moment Marxism helps both ways of understanding. On the one hand, it's used in China as a mainstream ideology. On the other hand, it's used, by the Zapatistas, some of them. I have something a bit uncomfortable about Marcos being a Marxist, but never mind. It's kind of a contradiction, I said, China, Chiapas, two different ways of understanding the world, but definitely the issue of global Marxism is really important, and in both cases we see that. But I think the issue here is the state. For the Zapatistas, the state is not to be taken, and as John Holloway said, it's a revolution without taking the power of the state. And that's for us to discuss whether this is very inspirational, what is in the book. Is there any new forms of revolution, like interstitial revolution? So when it comes to women, for example, we can talk about Rojava, maybe for the next book, the women in, dealing with the Rojava revolution, or even the Zapatistas women, who were very, very inspirational. I think you mentioned them. So I am really surprised when I hear that people feel that Marxism is not applied anywhere. That's for sure. They always say that. But particularly in the global South, when in fact, as you mentioned, Simin, I think Marx was not Eurocentric, and particularly the last 10 years of his life, I'm working on that now with other colleagues, he actually changed his mind in many ways, particularly after Vera Zasulich, a populist revolutionary from Russia, confronted him with the question, we love capital, we are all reading it, but what we are supposed to do in Russia? Should we become all capitalists, suffer for centuries and then change, or can we do a revolution with the Obshchina in Russia? Because 70% of the population is are peasants. And then Marx wrote 4,000 words until he managed to get, him, 300. And then that was it. But he had already thought a lot about the linearity of revolution and the management of non-contemporaneity. That Ben Said, for example, is very good at explaining this, how Marx had this problem of time. He had recognized that there would be no capital without exploitation of the South. Rosa Luxemburg affirmed this even more and criticized him for not being clear at how much external contradictions affect the center. But he had a case study, and I think that's why he didn't engage. But he did say things about primitive accumulation and the importance of the indigenous population of the continent, their exploitation, their destruction. If we read, for example, books like Nails, the book, how was it? Oh, I'll tell you in a minute. He talks about the coloniality of value, Thomas Nails. Marx's thesis is that the condition of the social expansion of value is the expulsion of people in the global South and their exploitation from the beginning, from 1492. And then just to add something, this is my work, the work I'm doing at the moment is on decolonizing Marxism. It's a book coming. I will take the opportunity to advertise my book. It's Pluto Press, sorry, Rebecca, but I've been writing about this book for a long time because it was a difficult thing to do. I'm not finished yet, but it's basically the idea that Marx without Marxism, and in this we coincide with Simin, we cannot decolonize anything. We can talk about the significance of oppressed knowledges that need to really be there. We can talk about indigenous sent to oblivion, but we need to talk about the politics of time and why this happened. And then I think Marxism is an important tool to decolonize. However, in the way I see it, it's not only the typical anti-colonial struggles. I see it also, because you're right, those are important. And let's not believe that we are in a post-colonial world, please. But we have post-colonial societies where the coloniality of power, as Quijano calls it, exists. So we tend to reproduce, we call it racism, but in fact, it's the idea that people of color, brown, black, are less. And where is that coming from? The creation of the inferior for the purpose of exploitation. But so in this decolonizing Marxism, I see that, for example, Zabaleta Mercado, and this is Mao as well, and Trotsky, talks about sociedades abigarradas, motley societies, because the law of value and real subsumption has not been expanded all over. There are combinations. So if you go to Bolivia, you find lots of different forms of subsumption, hybrid, formal, informal. And so people, their subjectivities are very different. I can be an indigenous person, I can be a worker in the high-tech industry, I can be someone who works in and out the labor market. And that is what creates the subject. And in my work, what I actually want to find out or explore is not who is the subject of revolution, because there is no one, but what is that agency, that subject that is being formed, that is global, that's so different, and how do we deal with difference? And just to finish, so I think an important topic for the conversation would be utopia. What kind of a utopia? Is that a plan that we had in mind, or just the emotion that Ernesto Guevara had in his mind, that I don't want, I want to liberate poor people, but then he saw with Castro that they could take power, but he didn't think it in advance. And perhaps that is not what we need now. The important thing is that when we look at all these cases, we see the trajectory, and I love that. We see the real examples, the trajectory of revolutionary thinking and action, and how you are taking different pathways, and you cannot plan this in advance. And that is Marx. That is Marx. To
That
deal
is
with
Marx.
uncertainty. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anna Cecilia. That was, beautifully put. I will now hand over, hopefully, if technology has stopped fighting us, to Kate Hardy. So bear with me. I'm just going to spotlight her for you all. And over to you, Kate. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you all hear me now? Is that okay? I think the ideas are too dangerous for Teams, so it wouldn't let me. First of all, thank you very much to Simin and Becca for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here talking with this panel and with the audience. So I'm going to start by talking about some of my research and how it's inspired and informed my ideas around Marx, but then put it into conversation with Simin's book and three of the big themes that I think emerge from it. So a lot of my intellectual career has been dedicated to trying to develop Marxist feminist theorizations of sex work, mainly in collaboration with sex worker movements and thinking with them. But this began really with street-based sex workers in Argentina. So very strict orthodox Marxist analysis would be very pessimistic about the possibility of sex workers to organize, and they're, as Anna was saying, their kind of agency in the transformation of society. But I think what a lot of Simin's book shows is that it's necessary to be inspired by Marx, but really extending his analysis and making it really grounded in the concrete social relations is actually what all of these intellectual activists and leaders did. And I think that's actually where Marx is best. So I think, as Simin puts it, their creative engagement with Marx's ideas enable us to see these kind of vital insights. So sex worker organising in Argentina began really in the early 90s, when sex workers were facing really intense police brutalisation, to the point where their first demand was not to be rearrested within 24 hours of being released from a police cell. Most of the women had little or no primary education, but importantly, they had no direct labour capital relation. They're self-employed street workers with no employer in informal self-employed conditions. So they possess no shared conceptions of themselves sharing a social location, or even of their labour as work to begin with, let alone a conception of class or their class identity. So in the 90s, during one of the crises in Argentina, a breakaway union federation was formed. And this was, as the director of organising called it, space for organising 100% of the working class, because so many people were finding themselves outside of that formal employment class relation. And their definition of working class included, as one of them told me, someone that lives from their work, off their work, simply from their work. A pensioner is a worker, doesn't stop being a worker because she's retired. A worker who isn't employed doesn't stop being a worker just because you've left work. An unemployed person is a worker who just doesn't have it. So I think all of the theorists and revolutionaries in Simin's book really help us to kind of theorize this position. A lot, mostly because they expanded out who the revolutionary subject was, could be, and the agency that could be found in non-proletarian subjects. So the peasantry in Mao and Ho Chi Minh, and in Nkrumah, and in Fanon's case, the wretched of the earth, can show us that it's not just the wage relation as this exclusive site of exploitation and class identity. So the sex workers started, they were given a small office in this new union federation, the CTA. Mainly people left them alone because they didn't really want to be associated with prostitutes as they saw them at the time. But then a couple of people, the general secretary and the media coordinator, started talking to them. And Elena Renaga, who was eventually the general secretary of Amar, said at the beginning she was so ignorant she didn't even know what the word demand meant. That's the kind of level of political education. So through these conversations, they started to kind of reflect and analyse on their social position. And Elena said, in the Central, we learned what it meant to be part of a class. We realised what happened to us. The violence happens to all workers, all of the poor. It wasn't the sex industry. It was being part of a class that's excluded, discriminated against, and marginalised. And by shedding this kind of exceptionalisation of sex work, they're able to more locate themselves in this kind of longer history of marginalisation and exploitation, whether it's the maquiladora or the bordello or the street. And so this sort of rising class consciousness that they gained through these conversations, based on their comrades sharing their understandings of Marx and other kind of Marxist writers, made them be able to kind of organise up from these different class positions. But they also recognised the kind of intersectional nature of their oppression, arguing they were triply oppressed as women, as members of the working class, and as sex workers in a society with a double morality. And the political education that they gained also went beyond just this kind of conceptualization of class, but also about what you then do with it. So what you do to develop collectivism, comradeship. So Susanna Martinez said, they taught us everything about what it is to be a collective, the importance of compañerismo. I just used to listen. I would listen and not say anything for 2 years until one day I opened my mouth and now they don't stop me. But I think what's really important in this story is and Simin talks about this and I'll talk about it a bit more, is that the consciousness raising and the theorization of class struggle between these actors was reciprocal. It wasn't just established unionists imparting knowledge to sex workers, but actually in the process, sex workers were teaching them as well. So Zapata, who is the head of organizing, said, no one taught me more about Amar in understanding definitions of work and who constitutes a worker. And Carlos Sanchez, who was a member of the support team, said, I didn't agree with everything about sex work. Yeah, I said they should organise, but I had this ideological concept about what work was and it had to have a social function. But they've demonstrated to me that they are workers with concrete facts, not discourse. They've shown me their everyday lives and confront the daily reality of their job. And he actually said this made him reassess his own analysis of class. And he said, I had a conception of class, of what political system is. And let me tell you, they've helped me rediscover this question of class and who's part of it. Oscar Mengarelli, who was the leader of the State Workers Union, also said that beyond this kind of rethinking of class that they were able to do together by this sort of wider inclusion of unwaged workers, that there were other social relations to be contested that they taught him about. So he said, we don't teach them anything. We help them with some things, but they teach us a lot. And we win in this exchange because we learn more. They made us develop on issues about which we were really ignorant, really reactionary, and that's worse because we came to this issue as revolutionaries. And they've made me understand things about which I was really reactionary and which we need to break with culturally, to realize that these are people with whom you can walk together towards this dream of transforming society. And I just wanted to tell you that kind of story from my earliest research, because I think it really speaks to three themes in Simin's book that I want to talk about. So the first one, which she really emphasizes throughout, is the circulation of theory practice, always about theory and practice together and ideas. So I really like this notion of Simin's of global Marxism, which is not just about the spread of Marx's ideas, but their multilateral movement and constant circulation through political struggle, not just through theory. And I guess a key point I'm trying to make here is that it's the analysis of street sex workers struggling on the streets of the global south, which has become my analysis. And I owe that to them. And a lot of the ideas in my writing are actually their ideas. So also thinking about this kind of circulation across all sorts of scales. So really they school me in their context-specific, concrete extension of Marxist theory. The second thing theme that it speaks to, I think, in the words of the Black Panther Fred Hampton, which Simin emphasizes as well, theory is cool, but theory without practice ain't shit. So shared in common with all of these intellectual revolutionaries in Simin's book is this refusal and inability to separate theory and practice, that they always go together. And I was struck in the kind of biographic bits about all of the revolutionaries, the kind of grunt work that they did. So doing the organizing, doing the printing of the pamphlets, not just writing them and like giving speeches, but doing that kind of day-to-day grunt work. And it's through that practice and through the struggle, I think, that the best kind of theory emerges. And so in this sense, I think with the example I've just given, you can draw on the decolonial theorist Maria Lugones to consider this a kind of callejera or streetwalker Marxist analysis, literally developed in the street and bringing in theorizing through body-to-body engagement. Now, the third theme, I think, that really came to mind when reading the book is that, in particular, decolonial Marxists, I think, advance Marx, and indeed my sex worker friends and informants in the movement have taught me that the founding moment is not just the wage, but dispossession and expulsion, as Anna was talking about at the end. And the writers in this book, as well as the women that I work with, have taught me that anti-capitalist politics relies more on just exploitation at the point of production, but requires unity of the dispossessed. As Fanon and others in the book show, this dispossession from the means of life and subsistence is always the fundamental feature of working class formation. So just finally, speaking of dispossession, it feels impossible to discuss this book and its focus on anti-colonial Marxist theory without making reference to the ongoing genocide in Palestine, as Simin referred to at the beginning. So the Israeli state and the biggest imperial power in the world, the US, are now, and they just said today that northern Gaza is going to be annexed, which most of us probably knew all along, but they're saying the quiet part out loud. So they're expanding this settler colony in real time by undertaking the most extreme high-tech genocide that we've ever seen. So as Marxists, we know this is not an ethnic or religious conflict, as many would have us believe, but it's accumulation by dispossession in the most extreme terms. of land and the trillion cubic feet of natural gas that lies off the coast of Gaza, but also dispossessing Palestinians of life, of children, of mothers, of babies in incubators, of entire bloodlines, of houses and schools, the very means of reproduction, dispossessing them of arms, legs, skin, and of the future, not only through the destruction of their bodies, but through scholasticides, the erasure of anti-colonial knowledge and memory. So as C.L.R. James wrote in Nkrumah and the Ghana Revolution, and as Simin cites in the book, colonialism is alive and will continue to be alive until another positive doctrine takes place. So I think what Simin's book really points to, and which others have made reference to, is that Marx and our interpretations and extensions of his work, and those on which we draw, are not just for posturing and abstract theorizing from our desks. Our task is to produce these positive doctrines, as Anna was saying, and never have these been needed more than now, as you're saying as well. So some academic decolonial Marxists, I think for too long, have thought that Marxist theory can somehow be separated from praxis, and you don't need to do the grunt work, you can just do the thinking, and making Marxist theory little more than kind of wordplay. But I think what Simin's book really reminds us is that decolonial Marxist theory is formed through and is only meaningful in practice. And that practice will often and necessarily be violent. And the intellectual revolutionaries of this book are, I think, a united engagement in their struggles over forming a better future. And it reminds us all that we must be too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. Some incredible points raised there. So thank you for that. Last but definitely not least, I'm going to hand over to Helen. So yeah, bear with me while I spotlight you, Helen, and over to you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you to Rebecca and to Simin for writing this book, which has brought us all together today. I feel a little bit emotional coming after Kate and her description of the dispossession in Palestine, but I will proceed. This book is a really important book, and I want to say that as important, perhaps more so, than the excellent concise biographies which bring together these sort of descriptions of these revolutionary characters and Marxists from, as you say, across the globe, bring them together in such a concise, neat sort of presentation, which left me, as someone who's written about one of them, Che Guevara, thinking, wow, how did she manage to, get so much in 20 pages or whatever for each one? But as important is the introduction. And I think that the previous speakers have laid out some of the really important reasons. I think key here is the refusal, the rejection of separating colonialism from imperialism. Just sort of saying, well, colonialism's over, so the problem is solved. And I think it is very, very important. This links, the other thing that the other speakers have talked about is what I call praxis, that link between theory and practice. And it's so also so important, to contextualize. I think Anna used the word contextualize the context in which these people are fighting against. So I wrote a book about Che Guevara's economic work in Cuba, and I just give a quote which was apparently said by Che to a Polish journalist, author and critical supporter of the Cuban Revolution, K.S. Carroll. So it's about Guevara rejecting the idea of theory being formulated in a vacuum, and this is apparently what he said. He said to Carroll, "So you would like us to turn Cuba into a sort of seminar for intellectuals, a Parisian cafe where people can sit down and rave about the latest literary hits. But what kind of country do you think this really is? Cuba is in the midst of revolution, besieged by US Marines. She must see to her defences and build her future. It's not for fun that we have decided to rush our children from secondary schools to high schools and from high schools to universities. It is because we have to act quickly, because we have no choice in the matter. In very quick succession, we have been taught the meaning of economic blockade, subversion, sabotage, and psychological warfare." So this helps to understand this apparent contradiction where, Che Guevara could criticize Soviet political economy and at the same time sort of defend the Soviet Union and respond angrily to Carol, who said the Cubans shouldn't use these Soviet manuals. Have you got any others you can recommend? He asked. And he spoke scathingly of liberals who wanted to turn the revolution, wanted the revolution to remain ideologically neutral and to give everyone perfect freedom to choose between a host of social philosophies and doctrines. So, you know, I think this is a really important point. When I started doing a PhD, my research on Che Guevara's economic ideas, so often the first response people would give me is, oh, I didn't know he had any economic ideas, you know, because he is just caricatured as this revolutionary sort of adventurist. So that was a really important part of my research and I think my contribution. But likewise with Fidel Castro, who hasn't made it into this book, but you know, we forgive you because there's so much being written about Fidel Castro. But you know, on the question of his political or ideological commitment to Marxism, there is very little, almost nothing in English, because we're always told that, you know, Fidel Castro was a power-hungry man, and in fact he turned to embrace Soviet socialism in order to maintain a position of power, right? And you devoid the man of any commitment or principles, of any sort of this context of a struggle against imperialism and understanding imperialism, as Simin points out, very, very important centering here of Lenin's theory of imperialism, right? Imperialism as a higher stage of capitalism. And so, you know, the way that we have to understand the decision of Fidel Castro to turn, you know, to take the Cuban Revolution with arm in arm with Che Guevara and the others, and many women who were key figures in that process as well, is that their struggle historically was a struggle for social justice and sovereignty. Now, in a context of colonization, colonialism and imperialism, the struggle for social justice and sovereignty necessarily becomes an anti-imperialist struggle. Because real sovereignty is about economic sovereignty, and it's about actually being able to control your resources, your homeland, your the population, what happens to them, and being able to use the wealth of the nation in the interests of its population to build welfare-based development. And that's real sovereignty, which allows you to then focus on social justice. And that has to take a form of anti-imperialism. And what we know, I think we'd all agree here, if it's not anti-imperialism, which is anti-capitalism, what is it? It has to be socialism. And what is the mechanism, the sort of methodological or mechanical guide for reaching that socialism? It has to be Marxism. And I think that Simin's book is really important in reminding us and grounding us. And as she says, as totally asserting that it is Eurocentric to argue that Marxism is Eurocentric, when what we have is these amazing histories that show us about these revolutionary figures. And yes, they may all be men, but none of them worked in isolation. They were all part of movements and had, you know, relationships. And I don't mean that in the sort of personal sense. I mean, they were part of context. And this is a really important book to remind us, and as other speakers have said, of the work that needs to be done today really urgently.
Thank you so much, Helen. And yeah, thank you so much to all the panelists for their brilliant contributions to this event so far. So for the next 5 minutes or so, we thought it would be nice, interesting, hopefully, sorry, I'm multitasking and trying to spotlight and talk at the same time, and it's impossible. I'm going to spotlight all the panelists so you can see all of their faces, and then yeah, what we're going to do is briefly talk in a sort of group discussion around the gender question in Marxism and Marxist research, because obviously we have an all-female panel here this evening, which is fantastic, and you know, it's a great showcase of the research being done at the moment. So yeah, open questions for all of our panel. just to address the gender question in Marxist research, your writing, what you come across personally. Who wants to start? Anyone?
I can start if you want.
Thank you, Kate. Go for it.
So yeah, when I was first thinking about this question about, I think it was posed as, oh, there aren't very many women who write about Marx, and it kind of blew my mind. So I went to my bookshelf and pulled off every book that I had that is written by a woman that engages with Marxist theory, and there are many of them, but it's a really interesting idea that actually still it's invisibilized that women do write about Marx. And I think it's important to separate women writing about Marx and gender and gender theory and Marxist theory, or feminist Marxist theory. And often I think women are not seen as writing about Marx because they are writing about Marxist feminism. And somehow that's seen as a diversion from the kind of more orthodox forms. And I started trying to make a list of all the women that have written about Marx, and I gave up because it was too long. But I think it speaks partly to a point that also comes across in Simin's book, that where Marx is extended and engaged with creatively through either decolonial takes or Black feminism or feminist analyses, it's seen as somehow outside the canon rather than actually expanding the canon and enriching it. And so actually, personally, that's my kind of simple take, is that it's simply not the case, and it's about a kind of where an orthodoxy is imposed about what Marx is and has to remain, and that is often lacking in creative engagement. That's when women are seen as not writing about it.
I can go next. Thank you, Kate. Yeah, I agree with what you say. And I would also say that traditionally, perhaps, right at the beginning of emergence of Marxism, it was a little bit of a male-dominated space, but then it changed. And particularly since the early 20th century, with women like Rosa Luxemburg, Alexandra Kollontai, Clara Zetkin, and later Silvia Federici, Angela Davis, and Nancy Fraser, so many others that you were also like referring to, they brought essential insights really to Marxism. And when Becca posed these questions, I was thinking that I hope that actually the 21st century sees proliferation of women engagement with Marxism, as we have seen, but we need many more women. Because part of women's contribution is obviously related to their unique experience of capitalism as women, so experience with labor, reproduction, family structures, and other things. But it's also important to keep in mind that women have offered new perspectives in Marxism that extend beyond feminist or gender focused, as you were saying, and their contributions have broadened the scope of Marxist theory across many areas, from political economy to ecology and democracy.
Helen.
Oh, is it me? Can you hear me?
Yeah? It was me imitating Rebecca's voice.
Okay. Well, I mean, I will talk. I'm a Cuba specialist. Okay, so not surprisingly, Cuba is full of women Marxists writing about all sorts of perspectives. But yeah, so I was thinking about this as well. You know, I'm pleased that Kate says that, you know, her shelves are full of female authors writing about Marx or using Marxist methods. I think there, you know, probably, yes, in the imperialist countries, there's a lack of women writing about Marx or with Marxist methodology, but I think there's probably a lack of anyone writing about Marx or with a Marxist methodology. And, you know, it's something we have to reclaim, because Simin actually uses a quote from Marx, which I used in my book on my PhD as well, about Marxism being just the most powerful sort of a system of analysis for interpreting the world. And, Hobsbawm, the quotes from Hobsbawm, and he goes on to say, we need to write about Marxist movements inspired by Marx and using Marxist methodologies. And we can't, if we're Marxists, we cannot be surprised that there is so little engagement with Marxism. Okay, I tell you, I'm an economic historian, but I've introduced Marxism into my own courses, but I've not had the option to pick courses on Marxism as an economic historian in Britain. So we need to encourage everyone really to engage with Marx and Marxist methodologies, because even the bourgeois academia recognizes what a powerful tool it is for interpreting the world. And as Marx went on to say, we can use that tool for also changing it.
Right, it's my turn. Thank you very much. I would say that what Helen just said is part of the struggle. Not only the liberal right dares to change the narratives about what we think about Mao, what we think about Che Guevara, etc., because they picture them differently as they were really revolutionaries, with all the problems that we already know. We're not acritical of the mistakes, but they changed the narrative. So Guevara is that handsome guy with the beret, etc., etc. But I think it's part of the struggle of ideas. Don't forget that there is a struggle over there too. If you Google Marxism in the University of Bath webpage, maybe you did, Rebecca, I am the only one that comes up. I swear to God. It's not possible. But then obviously that comes with some benefits, but also with some problems. But we do teach Marxism, but we had to fight against handbooks, against what the other colleagues said. So, people like David Harvey and others have these courses on Marx not for nothing, to give this, because they're online, people attend to keep teaching about it. The problem is you put someone in front of Capital, they fall asleep. You have to contextualize and you have to put, it's a difficult book without context, right? I prefer Grundrisse or I don't know, the more political ones that are wonderful. Class struggle in France, etc. So it is all about a struggle, I think. So we have to be patient and continue. And just for the record as well, there is a struggle with Marxists, male Marxists, who feel threatened by, sometimes by our presence. Perhaps if you do, for example, sex work and Marxism is not, you don't feel it that much, although you will be theorizing, Kate, but that's not something that they might do. But when you dispute certain ideas that are another, their thing, it is not easy. And there are all sorts of excuses, and there are friendly relations, it's all very good. But when the moment comes, they always find a way. And I think that was everybody's struggle, is our struggle as well. So it's not, we have to also reflect on the gender and the colonial within the Marxist world to start thinking, So for me, Marxist feminism is Marxism, because Federici and many others have completed it. I don't think he was not doing anything about feminism at all. I think he was, like Anderson says, Marx never thought about the working class as white and male, not at all, particularly not at his time, where children were working. It was a total disaster, 14, 17, 18 hours, women. But I think this is a distortion, so we had to dismantle all this. And I think this book is a real contribution to that.